there's one more in the event stage, asking, I've recently had an issue with this with a long-term play partner that I have, but could we go over communicating trauma responses with play partners and how to go
Yeah.
about it so their partners know what to look for? Because I know some people have the freeze response when something is going wrong, so it takes them a long time to call a safe word, because instead they froze when something went wrong.
Yeah. So I'm just going to sit down here real quick. So, trauma, right? Trauma happens. Trauma is a way for a lot of people to use BDSM as a way of exposure therapy and or some kind of normalization of pain, right? These are situations that everyone is going to have to face at some point, either as a top or as a bottom, when finding partners to play. When trauma happens, it is something that you need to be able to control. And the best way to control it, as I like to put it as a analogy or metaphor, I should say, is it's a landmine, right? It's a minefield. I always talk to people and be like, is if I do humiliation, for instance, I always tell them, is there anything I'm not supposed to do? Is there anything that, like a specific word? I had partners who actually start saying, yeah, don't call me sweetie. My abusive ex called me sweetie all the time, and that's just, I do not want that word to be called. And it's a term of endearment for a lot of people, but it's not the same for others. These are situations that we need to be aware of and be sensitive to. Now, again, when we are communicating and doing negotiations and we know that a certain situation cannot come up, and you yourself are aware that you have some trigger words or trigger moments or trigger scenarios, you need to be comfortable and own up to your past and communicate with the partner that you're wanting to have, right? There are situations where as a top, I get someone and they did not like the way that I was talking to them. It was not in a degrading way, but it was, in this example, the sweetie thing, right? Sometimes if I'm being endearing, I was like, oh, sweetie. These are situations that they themselves did not communicate to me, and I had to essentially de-escalate the scene, right? Everyone's different in how they react to trauma and how they are triggered. It is not something that I can give you an absolute science. The closest thing I can give you to an answer is be empathetic and sympathetic. In some situations, when you are dealing with someone who is triggered and they are put in a headspace that they cannot control, they're reliving a moment, they're having an episode of reliving the episode of their life, do not leave them alone. Do not engage with them. Take the moment to be present and wait for them to interact. If they are non-communicative, it is always good to first let people who are in charge of the event to be aware of it, right? In other situations, there is people who are very good at vocalizing and communicating with them, and they'll say, I need you to go away, leave me alone, I'm going to go in that corner, don't talk to me. Do as I say. Let them come down, let them go into their space that they need to do. Chances are, if they have a moment like this, it's not the first time this moment has happened, and they have some kind of internalized method to process that. Give them what they need. If they come up to you and be like, look, I just need you to be here just by yourself, give me words of encouragement, do that as well. But again, if you are in a situation where you know something like this could possibly happen, it is always in your best interest to say exactly what are situations that you want to avoid that can put you in these kind of mindsets. Because avoiding those mindsets is more important when those things happen, and the number of partners, and as sad as it is, you will at some point maybe overstep the line, maybe hit a landmine, said the wrong thing to the wrong person, and that could just trigger something. How you resolve that, how you actually start taking responsibility in that situation is going to make you the difference between someone who is a trusted member in the community and someone who is either a new person or someone who's going to take advantage of these situations.
It's not if, but when you
Um,
will step on them at one point or another.
yeah, with enough time, there will always be some kind of situation to handle, right? You are, in a sense, a firefighter in a fireworks shop, and you know there's going to be some fireworks going off at some point, and you just need to be ready for when it happens. Those are situations that I would say to those with trauma and those who will have to experience it. It's very possible they don't have any idea what happened. It could be a first time situation. The way to handle it is very much the same, right? De escalate. Do not add energy. Simply either keep it the same or follow the instruction of the person, right? And you also need to make some comfort checks on yourself. So I was with a person who used BDSM as a way of coping and or experiencing, best way to put it, catharsis. For those who don't know what catharsis means, it is the expression of something that should not be expressed in a natural manner. If something that is a child born and it makes you sad, right? That is a moment of catharsis because it is literally not supposed to make you feel that normally. If someone finds pleasure in pain, if somebody starts finding ways of release through some not normalized method of doing it is a sense of catharsism. She didn't tell me this at the time. And when we were communicating with each other, she was like, I really just want to just get beat up, fucking welted. I've seen her done plays. She does fucking whip plays. I've seen her do it. I know what her limit is because I've seen her personally interact with other people. And I was like, okay, I know how to deliver that kind of energy into the scene. What she didn't tell me is that she had a bad week, to say the least. And that bad week needed some really aggressive energy. And I was okay giving it to her. The main thing is, I was not ready for the emotional aspect that was going to be introduced. Because in her previous scenes, she always took it. She always like harder, like always been like telling me go as crazy as you possibly can. Fucking, I got my flogger. I'm doing baseball swings on her. She had enough physical. She was beaten up enough that her walls crumbled. She had literally be like, okay, my body is literally has no other excuses. It is now going to go and shift completely into another mindset. It is going to break down, start bawling and crying. She continued to cry and she looked at me and was like, I didn't tell you to stop. You need to fucking keep going. As a top, there's a pressure again to perform. I simply said, I agreed to do this with the mindset of what it would be in my head. And you did not communicate that there would be such an emotional response during the scene and that this was going to be simply fun, casual sorts of things. And when I'm saying she's crying, I don't mean like slight tears coming down. I mean like bawling out crying. I've never seen her do that. I had to take the responsibility for myself to say, I'm going to say red. Red is not just a word for bottoms, it's a word for tops as well. Being able to communicate that clearly to the somebody and say, this is outside of my comfort zone. We need to stop. I simply told her, we need to stop and we need to come back to normal levels. That right there was able to communicate exactly what I'm comfortable with. I took responsibility for myself. And also, I made sure that she wasn't going to get worse. Because if somebody's crying after getting beat up like that and you left them, dear God, that's going to make shit worse. And you do not want shit to get worse. You want to come back to some level of normalcy. So I just sat there and I talked to her, asked her how her day was, what was her week. She told me. I'm not going to share the details for the sake of her privacy, but to say the least, she had a very rough week that she'll probably remember for a long part of her life. These are the situations you are putting yourselves in when you start doing BDSM. These are the things that can happen. These are the things that will happen. And you need to understand the risk and understand what you as a person are comfortable in partaking. And if you're not, then you need to set limits and you need to clearly define those limits to other people. Not everyone is going to be using BDSM as therapy. There is a individual in every community, and that individual is yourself. Community will be whoever and whatever comes in and comes out, but you are only going to be controlling what you are able to do, what you are comfortable in doing, and how well you're confident in doing it. Any others?
There's
Any
a
other?
follow up. There's a couple follow
Sure.
ups in the stage here. One follow up to that, at least, is from Chiez. It's important to have a clear and honest discussion about it, like what triggers them when things are getting close to what could trigger them, and putting safety measures in place. Things like alternative safety words, like holding onto an object or something similar if they go nonverbal, or repetitive tasks that if they freeze up would be very clear if they to notice, and then you stop play.
This is going to go past consent, but it is an important thing to go into discussion and negotiating, right? When you are nonverbal or you know that you are going to be non-responsive in a scene, to give you a clear textbook example, there are people who enjoy being waterboarded. A lot of tops, I wouldn't say a lot, there are some tops who enjoy the fact that I can dish this out, I can fucking take the fucking thing. A lot of bottoms too feel like they can test their resolve. I'm a better CIA agent than the CIA kind of stuff. And in a situation where you can't communicate, right? So for those who are unfamiliar on the process of waterboarding, do not do this, by the way. Do not do this. Red flag, do not do this. Your mouth is going to be covered, right? It is simulating drowning. How you communicate that is dependent on a couple of things. The traditional method is that you have a metal bar in your hand or some kind of bell or some kind of chime, something that if it falls, it's going to make a noticeable noise, right? You simply just drop it when they hear the ting or some noise, they stop, right? That's the end of it. If you use ball gags, there are things to be aware of. In those situations, you want to have some kind of communication, a nonverbal keyword, a safe word, I should say. For me, I'm from a wrestling background, so if you start tapping me twice, I'm done. I know that's a sign of submission, the sign that we're done here. For other people, it could be doing a cross on them. Sometimes this is not available because one arm's tied behind their back. In those situations, you need to be creative. You need to be able to communicate. For some people, it's stomping on the ground because their feet will be on the ground and they can just slap it on there. Communication can be limited, and I guess this is probably a good way for me to segue into CNC. Let's say, for instance, your mouth is covered and you're doing CNC, right? A common thing in CNC is wrestling and grappling and fighting. If you push back, how do you communicate from a nonverbal standpoint that you're not wanting to be a part of this? You need to communicate in a CNC. Some people, it's got to be like a unique situation. Some people actually like to push back. Some people like the kick and like the actual fight and wrestling behind it. And if you're not able to communicate for whatever reason, maybe you have a gag in your mouth, or maybe there is like a chokehold, and instead of around the neck, it is going to be like around the mouth to just like do airplay or breath play. You need to start communicating how to think about it. Some people, it's a clap, right? If they start clapping their hands together, then that is a huge, okay, cool, we're done, right? That's an intentional action that has to take place that can easily clarify what is and isn't happening. If not, I'll transition to CNC because that's a whole consent thing in itself that I'll go into.
There's one more thing here. It's more on the negotiation side, but I want to bring it up, and then you can decide if you want to address it now or
Sure.
after everything else. Is from
Sure. What's it?
Aurelia. Something that they want your opinion on is contracts.
Okay. Contracts. So there is a tradition behind it. There is a history of using it. The person who asked it, I believe, was Ariel. There is obviously a use of abusing it as well. There are people that I would like to say are lawyers inside of the kink community, and they use the ability of saying certain things to get a certain thing done. It's not lying, but they're telling something in false pretense. The prime example is something that happened with, I was not a part of this, but I saw it happen in one of the play spaces I was a part of. A guy came to a girl and say, I want to do some knife play, right? This girl, she loves to get cut up. She loves blood play. She loves knife play. So into it. And he says, you know what? I just want to do I just want to cut something. And she's like, I'm your pin doll. I can do anything you want. I'm down for it. That's mistake one. He says, I just have this urge and I just want to get it out of my system. Can I just do 8 cuts, right, on your body? And she's like, just 8 cuts? Yeah, but like just 8 cuts and that's it. Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, that's fine if you just want to get it out of your system. What happened is that they had the scene, they got done. She was like, okay, can I see a mirror? I just want to see it. She got a mirror. She looked at it. The 8 cuts were initials of his fucking name. And she got branded. These are situations that you really need to be avoiding. And he can't get mad because they had an agreement. Not only that, everyone fucking knew. Like, he did it. Usually in a play space, there is like a common area, there's a play space, and then a porch where people smoke. But in the common spaces where like they had the negotiation, I heard it, 6 other people heard it, and we're all like, that was a weird request. Why was it only 8 cuts? Maybe. So what happened is that she saw the mirror, she saw the inscription, it was like on her thigh, and rightfully so, she got fucking pissed. And when you piss someone off that much in a place where everybody has essentially weapons, you really need to be careful about what you do and how you say. He got beat the fuck out of him. Don't do this, but this is what happened to him. I did not partake. He got the shit beat out of him and he got tossed out. Obviously, she healed up pretty nicely because she had experience with scarification or all that sort. She knows what not to do and how to heal scars in case certain situations happened. But she learned today that there's a lesson in consent. Everyone here and everyone there knew exactly what the fuck he was doing. He essentially negotiated a scene that was technically correct, but completely was misgiving in the way that it was actually going to be enacted, right? Those situations can happen when you have a contract, right? People who will say, technically speaking, right? You signed it here. There's your inscriptions. But I want you to remind yourself, what usually happens with these contracts is that they're using keywords. They're using vague language, right? They're not being descriptive. And those are situations as a person, either as a top or bottom, because it happens to both, to just simply tell them, what do you mean by this? These are all things that in a good contract would be fleshed out and written in consent. If that is not the case, it is a bad contract and you should never sign it. And if somebody does sign it and the community reads it and they're like, motherfucker, we know what your intent was on this. You expect to have really shitty things to happen to you by really good people who know how to deal with. It's not good. Now, they're good for beginning conversations, a starting point. You're like, here, this is it. Online, there's like a whole entire website where you can just say, this is my profile. This is literally all my kinks, all my soft limits, all my hard limits. There you go. And you can just be like, cool, I have a number 7, a number 5 large, a number 6 with dip.
Love the reference.
You can actually start having fun with it to a certain degree. But you can actually start doing a lot of bad things. The book 50 Shades of Grey, do not read it. It is bad. It is horrible. Do not think it's a good example. Do not use it as inspiration. Do not use it as any source of material that is even closely related to BDSM, because it is absolutely fucking not. Communicating with someone and being able to trust them is half the thing, right? It is 80%. I like to use 80%. It's a majority of BDSM. If you do not trust the person to clearly communicate with them and that they would honor their words, are they really someone you really want to play? And And that kind of trust and that establishment and that testing of trust enriches your dynamics, enriches your scenes, helps you encourage yourself to actually become closer to the person.
Real quick,
I will always, yes.
to add on to what Scholar is saying, if a contract has that sort of bad language in it, I like to tell people that I'm working with or people that I'm teaching that it is a tool, as Scholar said. It's definitely a tool. If something is in there that goes and has intentional harm against you or will accidentally harm you, to me, I consider that part of the contract null and void. And if enough of those stack up, have a serious discussion on what that contract is, because it is a tool. It's not the end all be all. Yes, you are agreeing to a contract, but it's not a metaphysical contract. It's not legally binding. If something's in there that is going against who you are as a person, then you have every right to say no. Consent happens even with contracts in place. Does that make sense? And you can change your mind at any time. So use a contract as a tool, not as an end all be all, is my opinion. And in regards to what happened at the dungeon, yes, I have seen stuff like that before. Your main priority at a dungeon is when you're doing pickup plays to be very hyper specific. If you're with somebody that you trust and that you've been with multiple times, that's when you can start allowing for a little bit more creativity. And that's your rack, prick, and CNC and stuff. But if you're doing pickup play, I highly recommend being very specific in your negotiations, just like Scholar said.
Comments?
If I may, also from a legal standpoint, legal contracts under any circumstance cannot and are not allowed to, by legal law and stature in most countries that allow any sort of physical harm and death. Any contracts that are designed or legally binding as so are considered null and void, and if they were brought into court, would be used as an example to get you thrown in prison. So rest assured that no matter what, such a contract can never be legally binding.
Yeah, keep going.
No, that's really it. It's just the fact that from a physical stances, even, and what's funny is they really, because they were talking about it in a court scenario, even if you grab a plane, go out into international waters where rules are a lot more loosely, you still cannot physically make a contract that signs someone's life away or brings any physical harm. You're allowed to make disclaimers, but the contract itself cannot physically state that harm will be physically brought to the person. Because if it does, well, then you might as well just be signing a random piece of paper, because that's about as effective as it's going to do. So,
Yeah, most people. Okay, so
legally say
when most people look at contracts, I don't think anyone. There are discussions about bringing it into legal aspects, right? First off, most contracts are not authorized unless they are notarized. At least that is in America. I'm not sure for those who are outside of it. But there is a notary who signs and says, you as a person have signed this contract. You normally won't come across contracts. And if you do, they are in a couple of situations, right? The first and most common one is when you are in a dynamic of service. When you are dealing, there is a type of people who do service kind of plays where you are a part of a leather family, pack family, some kind of dynamic, right? And with that, there is very strict ways of interacting with each other. They usually have something of a ceremonial piece of paper that says you as a person have signed this, and it's a song and dance, right? It's not legally binding, but it is something to say it's like a pledge to a fraternity. Do you have a question? Sure.
Servitude play, when it comes to the contract, is once again not something to take 100% serious. It's just an outline to let us know what is okay, what is not okay. But it's highly negotiated, highly talked about, and very detailed. This way, the person who's giving servitude is not crossing certain lines. It's still consensual, of course, and can still change, but it's just an outline.
Yeah, like for the servitude aspect of it, if you're going into being like, yes, I will be your sexy maid, or I will be your sexy XYZ, put dynamic here, right? You are essentially just giving a handbook of conduct. If you agree to be a part of this, is the rules that you will be obliged upon. These are your sirs. This is the master. These are the bottoms, right? How you conduct yourself will be negotiated based on your rank in the family. Some people have that, some people don't. That's all lifestyle, right? It is all ceremonial. It is not binding. If you're in the middle of something and you're like, I just don't want to be a part of this, you can just leave. The door is always open. You can just simply exit out, right? And I
Captain,
always encourage you to focus on your own stuff.
as Captain Barbosa says, they're more guidelines than actual rules.
Pretty much. And also, if you're being a service bottom and you sign a contract, the most common way that it's going to be implemented is that there's going to be rules, and your top will most likely find situations to make you feel like, did you do your homework? Do you remember the rules? You didn't do this, and this is part of the rules, so that means 5 across the ass. Smack, right? Those are the kind of things where it's like rules to learn, and otherwise some agreed upon engagement will happen, right?
And just to re-clarify, the UN, otherwise known as the United Nations, supported by 193 countries, has actual contracts listed in its own doctrine that prevent countries from creating such contracts that reduce any sort of physical harm to their citizens. So if you weren't even clarified and were worried it only applies in the United States, it actually applies for most countries, except for some third world, but they're usually out of contract. And even then, it's very unlikely to run into in the first place, not to worry.
Yeah, there's a lot of common sense between them. And again, that really is the kind of thing you need to be aware of, is just how you communicate, how you actually want to behave in front of each other. It's all about how easily you communicate, how much you want to consent to a certain act, and then from there you can go into a whole mess of situations.
Basically, rules of engagement.
Yeah, pretty much common rules of engagements. Big bold text, if you like contracts and rules, refusal at any time, withdrawals from agreements at any time. Yes. Yeah, everything is voluntary. Even when it's not, it is. You just need to remind yourself of that in situations, which it can be hard in some,
I was going to say, especially if
Yes.
they're being nefarious and abusive, then they'll try to convince you that you don't have a say. You absolutely do.
Yeah. And as you can see from this conversation, we have been talking for an hour and 20 minutes. We have not just talked about, yeah, you say yes to the thing and then you say no to the other thing. That's it. That's consent, right? It goes in everything, right? Consent. What is a good opportunity of consent? What is a good partner? What makes a good partner? Like, how do I decipher this between somebody who is and someone who isn't?